Hello out there. Good morning and welcome to the God Talk podcast from us here at Christian Faith Ministries in Jos Plateau State, Nigeria. And with me on our podcast this morning is our usual and very insightful resource person, Professor Kent Hodge, the president of Christian Faith Ministries. Prof, good to have you on our broadcast this morning.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah. Last week, sorry, on our last podcast, not last week, just a couple of days ago, we began a discussion series on the church, war, and global conflicts. And today, in today's episode, we want to look at the church in times of war, the actions of the church, whether the church should be silent or whether the church should speak up. I want to begin by saying that in times of war, generally, the world becomes very loud. Governments are speaking. We hear a lot from the media. Nations are taking sides. But what about the church? Over the course of history, we have records of the church being quiet in times of war and conflict, and a lot of people suffering for it. We also have records of the church speaking up and making a lot of difference. Today, we want to look at the responsibility of the church in times of conflict. And to get us started, I want to begin by asking Prof the question. Prof, should ministers speak about war and politics?
Um, yes, because it's part of life. When Israel came out of Egypt and received the Torah, the law, it covered all aspects of life. It covered
Yeah.
agriculture, social life, how to govern the nation, the elders, the kind of government to have,
Mm,
and even things like immigration.
mm,
That was all there. So the law of Moses was comprehensive, and there was nothing like sort of uh, making different components out of the law and segregating certain aspects from others,
mm,
and just say, well, we're just spiritual and just and ignore the rest of life. And that's what the church has tended to do in recent years, and it's in some ways it's rather Gnostic, and the Gnostic belief of the Greeks in early times was that spiritual things are good and everything else to do with this earth is evil.
mm,
And so where you get the monastic movement where people would come out of the world entirely and go and live as hermits in the desert and contemplate spiritual things and totally withdraw from secular life. That was sort of the Gnostic influence. That Gnosticism even went as far as to say that the Old Testament God was Satan, the one who
mm.
made material things, natural things, the one who created the earth. That the true God is only of heaven, of only of spiritual things. And our theology is, even though we don't go that far today, we still believe that God created the earth. We still believe in the Old Testament, the God of the Old Testament. Nevertheless, our theology today is heavily influenced by Gnosticism. The idea that when we die, we go to heaven forever, and we leave this world behind, and we have nothing to do with this world. And the even the physical resurrection of our body has been discounted and eradicated by many in the churches today. They don't believe in a physical resurrection. Eternal life is just a spiritual existence in heaven. So that's sort of a concerning theology because it means there's a real detachment between us and this world, and we can't detach, as we've been saying before. Any part we detach from and leave a vacuum, the devil will fill that. If the church
Yeah.
comes out of it, if the church comes out of any sector, it's just like Jesus said: if you cast a devil out and the place is empty,
Empty, yeah.
then seven devils will come back and take residence. It'll become the last state is worse than the beginning. So we're not allowed to leave anything empty in our own souls, our own lives, our social lives, political lives. Anything to do with life has to be filled with God's purpose, God's word, active Christians.
Mm,
So definitely the church is to be involved in politics and economics. And the reason we have such devastation in the world today is because the church has pulled out. We've had decades of the church becoming Gnostic and spiritual and saying we're too holy to be involved. And so, or in other countries, sometimes the church is not just wants to live a private life. They just want to enjoy their life, go on in their careers, have promotions, get better incomes, have holidays, bring up their children, and leave the political things, economic policy to the unbelievers. And if we leave those things to the unbelievers, Satan will occupy our world. There's no doubt about that. And then we become surprised because we thought Satan didn't exist anymore, so to speak. We thought that we're not really in a battle. That's hyper. That's conspiracy theorists think that there's a battle going on. That the world is actually good. Satan is good. Politicians are good. Economic advisors are good. They don't have any ulterior motives. There's nothing. Monopolists are good. People who control the world finance. They're all decent people, and they all believe in our well-being. They're not selfish. They're not after their own interests. And so we don't need to worry about them. We can let them do the work benevolently, and
Mm,
all will be well. But that's the deception that we've fallen into because it's convenient for us, especially in the environment today, where if we do comment politically or economically, we will become a target. We'll
yeah.
get cancelled. We'll lose our jobs. We can be arrested. And so it's very convenient for us to have escapist kind of theology, and be quote spiritual by not having anything to do. That's not having anything to do with these things, but that's not spiritual. That's um, negligence. It's abdication. We're abdicating our responsibility, like God gave to Adam and Eve. He said they're to have dominion over the earth. Well, Adam and Eve immediately abdicated that and gave that to the serpent in the garden. And there's been abdication ever since. The good, like the phrase says, evil only grows when good people do nothing.
Mm,
And good people are doing nothing today because they're afraid. They're intimidated. Their colleagues, and if you speak out, your colleagues will become embarrassed, and so they'll try to intimidate you to stop you. So because you make them look afraid and scared and selfish and that sort of thing. If someone is speaking out, the
yeah.
contrast doesn't look good, and so you'll get peer pressure to become like them. Don't become different to us. Be one of us, and we'll all have a drink together and encourage one another in our abdication. So that's the way the world is. That's the way even Christendom on a large scale is like that today. And we've got to get back to being the light and salt that Jesus said we should be. And that's not
Mm.
just by being spiritual. That's by being involved in all areas of life today.
Thank you, sir. Allow me to, you know, ask a question that would still emphasize some of the things you said. You've spoken about the need for the church to be involved, to speak up. And I like the fact that you said the gospel is holistic. You talked about the Israel's understanding in one of our other podcasts some time back. You talked about how Israel's understanding of the gospel of God and of his purpose for creation being tied around the Shema, which has to do with the totality and the holistic view they had about creation, heaven and earth being one, and God's kingdom renewing the earth, they both not being separate, and that the Jewish understanding of spirituality and life and also transfers into the early church had to do with every component of life. They are every spiritual, physical, material, everything completely. And so I want to ask that at what point, if the church decides to be silent in the face of all this, you acknowledge that evil has prevailed largely in the world because for a long time the church was silent. At what point does silence become sin?
Yeah, it's a very slippery slope, and it's not. I think it's pretty immediate, and we often don't realize it. We're not conscious of the decisions we make and the reasons we make them. Um, these all happen in the subconscious because we want it to be down there. We suppress it, and we don't want our conscience to speak
Mm,
because it's not convenient. And I was saying last time too, especially when we have children. And I remember, as I said before, when we had children and we had a mortgage, we had a loan from the bank for our house. if you lose your job, or support or whatever the case may be in somewhere, and you can't pay your mortgage, then your children are out on the street, and so that weighs heavily upon you. And most of the Western world today is in mortgage. One
Mm.
thing I like about housing here in Nigeria is that, not in every case, the bank's getting more and more involved, but in many cases, people build their houses by cash, and it takes longer,
Yeah.
but they're the outright owners of it. And
Yeah.
no bank can come and tell them what to say, how to speak. You don't lose freedom of speech. But as in the West, almost everybody doesn't own their houses. Those who buy a house, even many people rent their houses, but those who buy a house, the bank owns them, and they're dependent upon a job, and so they're servants to the lender, and the lender is the whole system, not just the bank, but
Mm.
the big corporations, the ones that
Mm.
hire us, employ us. And there's a control coming from that sort of elite sector over the lives of most of the people in society, and there's a slavery there. And people can say, well, it's a conspiracy theory, but I'm sorry, that's what the Bible says. And it says that the borrower is servant to the lender, and that's
Yeah.
a fact.
Yeah.
That's a fact. It's the scripture, and there's no getting around that. And we are vulnerable. You say, well, we have our freedom of speech. Yes, I borrowed from the bank, but I'm still my own sovereign person. Well, we're not. And we're vulnerable. The more indebted we are as a society, the more those who we are indebted to can take control because of they have more cards in the
Mm.
game than we do. And so, just like the game Monopoly, I don't know if you know it, but
Yeah.
Westerners do. So, yeah, you can take control. And that's the whole aim of the game, is to take control.
Mm.
And so, again, people think we live in a benevolent society. There's no devil anymore. It's one of the deceptions of modern society. Since the 1960s in the West, we've probably lived in one of the better periods of history. We were in 1960s Australia, were all Christian. Um, we didn't have corruption.
Mm.
This is, speaking on the whole. Compared to today. We had good families, good marriages. We didn't have
Yeah.
divorce, and we had freedom, total freedom. No one told us what to think. We Our thoughts were manipulated by the press, but it wasn't a kind of government authority over people's thinking like we have today. Um, so we had a lot of freedom, and that freedom has been taken away bit by bit over the years, and to
Mm.
the extent that we live in an entirely different world today in Western nations. Um, and many people don't realize that because they weren't around in the 60s. Um, and So we don't live in a benevolent world, and we live in a world that is where it's people are vying for power, they're vying for supremacy, they're vying to take control. It's a bit more difficult when you have a Christian nation that has built in democratic protections, the division of power, so no one's able to get the upper hand because powers are separation of powers. The judiciary, the president, the parliament, the church, the media, all these powers have been separated.
Yeah.
But in recent times in the West, this separation has broken down, and all these powers have been accumulated into central power through the money of the supreme corporations. Uh, so we've moved out of capitalism into corporatism, where too much powers flow to the top. Protections against smaller financial powers have been broken down, so smaller businesses have been swallowed up. And when the corporate powers become too strong, they begin to buy out the media, buy out the government, buy out the judiciary, and so all power is centralized. And that's the situation we're in today. So you can't say we live in a benevolent world, and it doesn't matter. Once you stop speaking out, you've already agreed to this control, and to falsehood, because there's a whole lot of manipulation in this centralism where lies are told, false narratives are put out. We know they're not true,
mm,
but it's inconvenient for us to admit that because it goes against our professions. You know, professions today are not guided by truth; they're guided again by control. There's a profit orientation in in all professions, and so it's in the profession's interest to control the narrative. And so, if anyone within that profession goes against the narrative, they will be deregistered and they will lose their job. And people know that in within their heart, that they know the dangers they're in. They don't often confess that or admit to it, but they bury it in their subconscious. But they know that's the case. And so, when they fail to speak truth, they're compromising with this. You can call it a demonic reality,
yeah,
because it's when obviously it's not the corporatist powers, not the monopolies that are ultimately in control. It's a demonic power behind it that's trying. The reason why demonic influence wants to centralize powers so that ultimately they can take over. Uh, eradicate truth, eradicate scripture, eradicate the word of God, eradicate the Bible, and that's always becomes the target in any totalitarian state. The church becomes the target, the scriptures, faith in general. It's always the case through history. And that's the target today. Christians are still strong in many nations, so these powers won't come out and admit that that's the target. They'll do it subtly to start with.
mm, mm,
But there's no doubt about it that the gates, it says, um, I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. So there's
yeah,
this ongoing warfare, like there was in the Garden of Eden with the serpent, or between Cain and Abel.
mm,
There's this on. We are in a war. I said to someone a couple of years ago, "We're in a war," and it just angered them so much that I could be such a conspiracy theorist. They're Christian, and yet they took that as a conspiracy theory that we're in a war. Well, look, we're always in a war.
mm,
Hello, it's called spiritual warfare in the Bible,
yeah, yeah,
and Paul never said, "Well, this is only for this generation. After that,
mm,
it'll be goodness, and there'll be no warfare." The church is constantly in a state of spiritual warfare. And to deny that is a compromise that we have taken for convenience.
mm.
We just want to bury our head in the sand like the guilty ostrich that you stoned on one of our recent podcasts. And so the ostrich has a bad name, but we become like that, and we deny it. So we bury that truth in our conscience and don't admit it. So we're already culpable immediately. We allow ourselves to be silenced by the system. And that culpability just gets worse because as we go on, first of all, we're silent about abortion. And then you get late term abortion. And
Mm,
then you get full term abortion where they're killing babies at birth.
yeah,
And so, our silence becomes even darker and darker and
mm,
more corrupt and more culpable the further we go on into this. So, immediately we agree with silence, we're making a covenant with the enemy straight away.
mm, mm,
And that becomes deeper and more wicked as we go on, and until we get buried in it, and until we, fall prey to the whole system ultimately. I'm not saying that everybody who compromises immediately is, you know, guilty before God in the ultimate sense. They
yeah,
are in as far as they've compromised, but God understands our weaknesses, and He understands our positions. He understands what we're afraid of. But I think there comes a point in our culpability in which we become accountable,
mm,
in which we recognize that we're compromising our conscience. We cannot suppress these things in our subconscious anymore. And
yeah,
then it becomes an open decision that we make with open eyes and fully aware that we're going to side with the evil. And that's the point of accountability in our lives.
mm,
And I can't say when that happens in someone's life.
mm,
That's between each one of us and God.
yeah. I hear you, sir. When you say the church needs to be involved and the church must speak up, and that when the church is quiet, evil continues to grow in the world. I do agree with that line of thinking. However, there are those who are of the opinion that every time the church makes inroads into political and economic discussions, she opens the door for a lot of compromise and a lot of things to start going wrong. They believe that when the church begins to talk about politics, when the church becomes involved with governance, economic issues, then these corrupt people who kind of have a stranglehold on the world also now have a way into the church to start influencing and manipulating the church. In Acts of the Apostles, at the commencement of the church, we see that the early church came up against a lot of opposition from the Jewish Sanhedrin, the religious rulers and leaders of the day, who did not want the disciples to preach freely. And a number of times they would accost them and arrest them. On one of such occasions, when they were arrested, in Acts of the Apostles, chapter 5, verse 29, Peter and the other disciples responded to them, should we not rather obey God than obey men? It's incumbent upon us to obey God instead of to obey men, which also becomes the responsibility and the duty of the church. So I want to ask, for those who keep saying, okay, well, when the church begins to make inroads into political issues, economic discussions, we also allow powers of the world today to enter the church and influence the church. How can the church avoid manipulation by political powers, sir?
Well, that's true. Often the church has used the government for its own personal interest. And this is what the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem was doing with Rome. They were using Roman power for their own personal interest to get wealthy and
Mm,
to suppress others, including the early church. So that Sanhedrin in Jerusalem are called the whore in Babylon in
okay.
Revelation. Some people get really angry when I say this, but the book of Revelation was initially, I'm not saying only, but initially, its main target audience was the church in the first century. And the whore that was persecuting the church was, um, well, they had two persecutors mainly. One was Nero of Rome, and the other one was the Sanhedrin or Jerusalem, or the false prophet. So you had the beast, which was Rome, and you had the false prophet, which was Jerusalem. And so Jerusalem was also called the whore or Babylon. Babylon meant the whore, and that means the apostate, those that were in relationship with God but had gone a whoring after the kings of the earth.
Mm,
And so that's exactly the description of Israel and the prophets. And that's what Israel did in the days of the early church. So
mm,
they rejected their relationship with God. They divorced themselves from that and became an unfaithful bride. To be a whore, you have to in the context of the New Testament, you have to be to commit apostasy. You have to be in that covenant with God, and that could only have been Israel to have whored in that way, because they're the only ones that had that relationship with God, the old covenant relationship with God, and so married to Him, and so they were the unfaithful bride, and so you see that that happening there in the New Testament times. And so they were using political power, as in Rome, to buttress their own private interests, and they were persecuting innocent people. Now that can happen today. There is a danger of people who call themselves Christians. Once Christianity starts to grow in a society, and this happens anywhere. Once something becomes an institution, if you like, some sort of sector of importance or significance in a society, it will become infiltrated. The serpent will infiltrate it, Satan will infiltrate it, and you'll have players within that institution or sector of society that are not genuine, that are just
mm,
there to take the power of it and use that power for some other purpose. And this also happens in the church. You will get even clergy in there that are not genuine believers, but are just they're agents of Satan.
yeah.
But Paul said that even Satan can transform himself into an angel of light.
Mm,
So this is not the true church, but they will be purporting to be the church, and they will seek to gain political power to use it for nefarious ends that will
mm,
come out in due course. They won't be obvious immediately. And they might even be acclaimed theologians. They might have degrees and doctors and all the rest of it. And so, yes, this is a danger that the church has to be aware of, and we can't be naive of these things and pretend that, be an ostrich again and pretend that these things don't happen.
Yeah.
No matter what side we're on, we're always the devil will try and infiltrate. Um, and so there's always the danger of the ostrich, denying that it doesn't happen in our area or in our worldview. It happens in every one of them, and there can be so. And there are right wing sectors, if you like, extreme right wing. There's this propaganda today that anybody that stands up for the truth is called extreme right wing, which is a lie peddled by the deep state in Britain, Europe, and certain parts of America today. Um, that if you stand up for justice and the law,
Yeah.
um, um, accountability and so on, then that's an extreme position. Even Christians are called, just because you believe in God, you're called an extreme right wing person. Well, that's hogwash, and it's a complete lie. And the reason they're doing that because they want to be able to steal money without accountability.
Mm.
But on the other hand, there is an extreme right wing that does exist, like the Ku Klux Klan in America, and sometimes they purport to be Christians. They use Christianity as a separatist kind of a supremacist kind of position,
Mm.
and which is not right. Now we can say Christianity is better, like the Book of Hebrews goes on about how better Christ is than the law, than
Yeah.
Moses, than the angels. So you can say the author of Hebrews is a supremacist. Um, but so in terms of faith and morality and so on, yes, there is a better place. There is. I believe that Christianity is the truth, and therefore it's better than something else that's not quite the truth. Um, but supremacy is what we're talking about here. Is it means that when we stamp upon the innocent, we use this kind of claim to supremacy as as an opportunity to become a totalitarian kind of person and stamp upon the innocent. So you got the Ku Klux Klan will do that, and so on. So they will use Christianity as a cloak, and you can even get that in government. So people are very wary when a government comes out and says that they're Christian, because, like in America, every president in my lifetime has been born again, um, at least during the campaigning season, um, and every time they go to a prayer breakfast and speak to the clergy. And that's clearly to get the votes. You get people like
Mm.
Bush and Clinton and all of these people, maybe even Biden. I don't remember. Um, yeah, Biden was a wonderful Catholic. That's right. Believed in
Mm.
full term abortion. Um, and transgender and everything else. And what do they call them? Those drag queens. Men that dress up as women and go to
Yeah.
children's
Yeah.
go,
Yeah.
go to children's schools and sexualize little children,
Yeah.
and that's supposed to be wholesome. That's how the devil and lead them and lead them into pedophilic
Mm.
relationships,
Mm.
nurture them into those relationships, and that is so wicked, and it's happening wholesale under Biden's regime,
Mm.
which was a regime, totalitarian regime. Um, Now you got the thing today where Trump purports to be a Christian. He's having a day of prayer on May 15th in Washington, calling everybody to that. He's reading, I think I saw him reading the Bible from his office desk on live television yesterday to the nation, reading from Chronicles, I think it is, that if Solomon served God, it would be well. If he didn't, then God would destroy the country. And
Mm.
he's speaking to America that if we set up other idols and go after them, like which is Satanism, which is what America has done, especially under Biden, they were pure Satanism has entered into the government in many areas. Then God will destroy the country. So Trump's in his right mind doing this. This is correct. This is the truth. Um, but and some freak out. Trump shouldn't be involved in Christian things. it's fakery, it's right wing supremacy. Well, you don't have any evidence for that. You just have the media hyping out and
Mm.
freaking out because anything Trump does, they will say that about him, that he's lost his mind. He should be in a nursing home. No matter what he says. Um, and a lot of people don't understand the war, so to speak, the fifth generation information warfare with Trump's fighting today, and they have no idea what's going on the battlefield. And so, why Trump behaves the way he does, and how it's benefiting the warfare tremendously. There's
Mm.
so much good happening at the moment in the world, but angry people are not going to sit down long enough to listen to it.
Yeah.
Um, so you just have to move on and ignore that and just get the job done. But yeah, there is a danger of the far right wing, if you call, or supremacy, and that can happen in any religion, including Christianity, where you get false actors in it. And it's something you do have to be aware of, whether it's possibility of it in Trump or anyone else. You can't just worship these people. That's what I mean by Christian involvement. That's one of the reasons Christians need to be involved, to
Mm.
stop Christian supremacy. And when I say Christian supremacy, I don't mean Christianity becoming the chief religion of a country. That's a good thing for that to happen. But what I mean is that people persecuting innocent people in the name of Christianity. That's
Yeah.
what's wrong. That's what we can't do. Can we become a predominantly Christian country and have the government being Christian people that propagate Christian values and even the Bible open inside? Yes, we can do that, and it should be done. That's all good, and we should all be involved in that in every country.
Mm.
But and evangelize and all the rest of it. That's all good, but it's when we use Christianity as a cloak for evil, that is persecuting vulnerable people, innocent people. That's what's wrong, and we cannot do that. And so we need to be involved to make sure that if a president does get involved in war, it's a just war and things like that. So we're talking about war in this series. There are times when war is necessary. But how is that war prosecuted? For what reasons is it prosecuted? And over the last, say, 4 decades, well, since World War One, just about every war that America's been involved in has not been a just war,
Mm.
and it's been based on the foundation of propaganda, coming right from Winston Churchill when he spoke to the Congress in Washington after World War Two and put up the Iron Curtain between America and the Soviet Union, and created this everlasting enmity in which the British Empire fed upon that and continued its control over the nations. That's another story to go into that, but that's the truth. If you know the facts of the matter, the history, you read the documents. Um, F.D. Roosevelt was in power at that time, and he spoke expressly about this, that what Churchill and think tanks from London had done in overthrowing American politics in order to use their army for unjust wars to buttress the imperialism of the British Empire in the years to come, Commonwealth, and so on. That's
Mm.
exactly what happened, and F.D. Roosevelt spelt that out and in detail in his letters and memoirs, which we have today. And if anyone, instead of people listening sometimes, oh, it's rubbish. Well, look, I'm sorry. Go and study it. Go and read it. The Bible says in Proverbs, a fool decides a matter before he hears it, just because he doesn't
Yeah.
like it. And so Christians have to be involved to overcome these kind of genuine conspiracies that have been going on for decades to overthrow nations and governments and so on. And on the other hand, we need to be involved to make sure that Christianity is not abused and taken over by the devil
Mm.
for some sort of false agenda. That's very possible that can happen. Has happened in history many times, and we're going to make sure that that doesn't happen. That we have a proper representation of Christianity and what it means to follow Jesus in our governments and in our nations. But we can also never forget that a government's job is to punish the evil and reward the
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Um, and we can't say that the governments follow Jesus to the extent that they don't use the sword. Well, that's
Mm.
nonsense. That's contrary to the word of God. governments do use the sword at the right time for the right reasons, and the church needs to be involved to point out the right time and the right reasons,
Yeah.
um, to make sure that it's not abused.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. But we'll
Uh,
not be perfect in these ways. There's always going to be um, evil done here.
mm,
Um, as I said, when good people do nothing, evil prevails, and that's
yeah.
going to happen in any generation. But we need to be involved as much as possible to stop that.
Mm. All
Sorry,
right,
sir.
sir. One of the things we have begun seeing a lot of around the world today is the rise of nationalism again. Across the world, there's an agitation for for nationalism, and I believe also it's to kind of like curb the scourge of globalist greed and trying to just undermine the sovereignty of nations around. And so there is a fine balancing act that I think you should help us, get a grasp of here. As these nationalistic tendencies and agitations increase to counter globalists, how do we balance nationalism with loyalty to the kingdom of God, especially when it comes to care for humanity as a whole?
Well, nationalism is a good thing, and like another word for it is patriotism. Patriots are loyal to their nation and care about their nation, and that's a good thing. If we don't have patriotism, how can we? What's the value of being in our nation?
Yeah,
You go out to work, you do a good day's work. You're honest because why? You want to build your nation. Why do you want to build your nation? Because you love your nation.
yeah,
Same if you're in the army. You're there because you believe in the integrity of your nation, and so the nation for that has to have um, nationalism. That means just a belief in the national vision, a belief in
mm,
the national identity.
mm,
That's important for everyone who lives in a nation. And one reason you get people who don't do a proper day's work is because there's no meaning to their lives.
yeah,
There's no meaning to their nation. There's just corruption everywhere. And when you get a breakdown in patriotism, you'll get an increase in corruption
mm,
because there's no loyalty anymore to anything that the nation aspires to. So we have a motto on this site at Wunahiri in Jos. Um, we have a big flag you can see from a far distance, a big flag of Nigeria, because we want to build up the sense of national pride in the right way.
mm,
Um, you know, w- we have students coming here, a lot of them. We want them to love their nation and believe in it, believe in their future.
yeah,
And you got to fight for that because there's a lot of oppression. There's a lot of disgruntledness. There's a lot of cynicism about the nation today, and cynicism is a destructive thing. And cynicism comes because globalism breaks down sort of national identity,
mm,
and people sort of think, well, where's the meaning in life? What's the point? And people just become cynical, and particularly youth that see all this. There's no future in this, and they're looking at their future. And a nation that has no identity, there's no future in it. So we want to give our students a sense of identity and purpose. And so you have the Nigerian flag. That's a beautiful flag. It's clean. It's not torn. It's washed. So it gives something to aspire to. And on the bottom of the flag, we've got written faith, family,
flag.
flag.
Yeah,
In English, that's the three F's: faith, family, flag. And these are the three things that form our identity as people. And they're all important. And so nationalism is not the problem. And this has been said since Hitler, and this is all constructed since Hitler. Hitler was raised up by the globalists in order to further the purposes of globalism.
mm,
And again, this is people will get very angry about this. They'll say this is conspiracy theories, but I'm sorry, go and read the history. And I don't mean the history at your high school or the history on the media. Go and search out the real facts, the history, the written materials that are not being
mm,
shared today. You will find out that Hitler was financed by London. He was financed by New York. So was the Bolshevik Revolution in the Soviet Union. In order to build a division and a separation that would breed hostility in the world, and that always gives the banks and the globalists more power, divide and conquer. I don't have time to go into the details of this. It's a well proven phenomenon that happens constantly. All empires have indulged in it. They create enmity between regions, and so they can further their goals. That's why hostility is created in Ukraine. It's created there by London. It did not rise of itself in order that London may gain more footage into the Russia to gain control over its resources. London gained this control in the days of Boris Johnson, 1990, 2000, when they bought out, they bribed all the oligarchs of Russia and took control over the main corporations of Russia. They had control of Russian resources. But Putin got them back. When Putin came in, he came back with nationalism
Mm.
and wanted to rebuild the dignity of Russia. And he expelled any oligarch from Russia that sided with London and not with Moscow, which was the right thing to do. But because Putin did that, he's an evil man. And, all the propaganda put out by London and the Western press is Putin is an evil man because he stands for his country. He's rebuilt his country, and Russian people love him
Mm.
because he took them from absolute poverty to one of the best nations to live in today, just in a matter of, I don't know how, 15, 20 years. Um, despite all the sanctions and everything against him, people get angry about this as well. People in the West like to have their approved allies and approved enemies, and most of it's nonsense. That's your propaganda. So Washington and New York and London supported Hitler's rise to power because it would create a division in Europe that would bring in war that was deliberate, so they could bring down industrialization in certain countries, and the banks could keep control of these regions. That's
Mm.
why they always have wars, and that was a deliberate act, and so um, in order that they could gain a further control on Europe. Um, they engineered the Second World War. So um, the the main aim of sorry, bless you, sir.
Yeah.
The main aim of the Second World War, or the main reason for it, wasn't nationalism. It was the globalists that engineered it.
Mm.
Now, I haven't covered this in great detail here, but the Nazis or Nazis began to take control, not just in Germany, but in America also in that time. 1932 or 1933, there was a coup attempt in Washington. That's again, this is not taught in history, but it's easier to find out. Just put it in the internet, you'll find it out. A coup in Washington to be led by General Smedley Butler. He was one of the most popular generals of the time, and the fascists or the Nazis of America got him. They conscripted him to lead a coup against F.D. Roosevelt in Washington with 500,000 soldiers to take over the government there. And this is all documented, and it was led by Wall Street. Major corporations like Ford Motor Company. I don't remember the names of the other. I don't want to name any in case I'm wrong, but Ford Motor Company was part of it. Also, George Bush Senior, not Prescott Bush is his name, not George Bush, but his father. We've got two George Bushes. The first one, his father, called Prescott Bush, was a sponsor of Hitler and of the coup
Yeah.
attempt. The corporatism that I mentioned before of America was basically a fascist Nazi corporatism, which is not in the history books. And that's why they attempted this coup, and that's why they sponsored in Washington. That's why they sponsored Hitler as well. So it wasn't nationalism that gave rise to the Second World War, and the reason they did sponsor Hitler, these people, these are globalists. These Nazis, corporatists, are globalists. They want global control over Russia, over China, over everything, over the West. And the reason they did sponsor the Second World War was so that they could blame um, they could blame nationalism on this,
mm,
and therefore decry nationalism, which has been the chorus that they've been singing ever since the Second World War, that nationalism is bad and we need globalism. And the Second World War was set up for that very purpose, so they could escalate the evils of nationalism through Hitler, and then after that, show how evil it is to be nationalist, and therefore come against any nation that doesn't let down its borders for a globalism to take over.
mm,
That's one of the main purposes of the Second World War. Um, it was engineered by the banks. It was paid for by the banks. They paid Hitler through the banks, the Western banks. They gave him engine or sorry fuel for his aircraft,
yeah,
for his Luftwaffe, his air force. That was all fueled by Western fuel, which they gave to him throughout the Second World War. Um, so this whole thing, without these oligarchs, these Western corporatists and globalists, Hitler could not have fought that war.
mm,
Not have been possible. He didn't have the resources for it, and so that's why today we have to cry again. So it wasn't nationalism that led us into the Second World War; it was the globalists that did it. But they won't tell you that today. They'll tell you it was nationalism. Anyone that doesn't want to be part, like Hungary, anyone that doesn't want to be part of a globalistic structure, that they will call them Hitler.
mm,
And that's what Hitler served. He served that purpose for the globalists, to be used as the bad man. And so they can say everyone that Trump is standing for his country today, he's a Hitler. He's standing for the well-being of America. Putin's standing for the well-being of Russia. Well, he's a Hitler. Z is standing for the well-being of China, so he's a Hitler. Z is overthrowing globalism in China
mm,
today,
mm,
and he's not as far advanced as Putin has. He's still got an uphill battle in this, but that's what he's on. And same, Trump's doing the same thing, overthrowing globalism in America.
yeah,
So soon it'll catch on, and it needs to happen in Britain and in Europe as well.
mm,
Um, but that's the way we're going today. We're heading back out of globalism into good nationalism, not a nationalism that has been manipulated by globalists, but a nationalism of sovereign interest, but cooperating with other countries
mm.
for a mutual well-being.
All right, thank you very much, sir. Before I let you go today, I would want to ask you one last question. As we discuss on this subject of war, there are more grassroots ramifications, and for times of war. In Matthew chapter 5, what we call, in fact, we talked about that briefly on our discussions in our last podcast. I asked you a question regarding that, the Sermon on the Mount. And before, while I was asking that question, I also made an observation that on our YouTube channel and even this our Facebook or social media handles, you can actually go back to watch and listen to our podcast, previous podcasts. We have a podcast there titled "The Life and Teachings of Jesus Christ." That we have about 6 or 7 installments in that series where Prof discusses the teachings of Jesus in detail, and there's a whole segment on the Sermon on the Mount. And it's something that I want to encourage you to go back and watch and listen to. It will greatly bless you and enlighten, educate you, help you understand the gospel and the message of Jesus within its proper context so that you can be a better disciple. But, Prof, when we look at Matthew chapter 5, in that Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talked about relating to the enemy, and he was speaking to the Jews about loving their enemies. And within this context, primarily had to do with they wanted a kingdom that would overthrow the Romans and punish them and kill them and destroy them. And Jesus said, no, in fact, if you are compelled by a Roman soldier to go 1 mile, go the second mile. If they take your clothes, let them have your clothes also. And teachings like that, love the enemy, do good to them, and all that stuff. And some persons today argue, especially within the context of war, when we find ourselves in war zones, people ask the question: Is it Is love your enemy a practical thing to do within a conflict situation or war zones? I want to ask you that question as we round up today.
Oh, definitely. When we were in a war zone in Jos
Yeah,
back in 2009, Christmas
yeah,
2010,
yeah,
and you would get Christians and Muslims killing each other. Um, Now, most of the, or if not all of the Christian media, like newsletters would go out around the world through Christians putting out newsletters about what was happening. None of them that I saw mentioned that Christians were killing Muslims. Not one of them. They were all about the Christians that were being killed. They're all very one-sided, which is that disturbs me. Um, and particularly when it consistently happens. We had another attack at Atagara on the border between Nigeria and Cameroon, where a lot of Christians and Muslims were killed, where Christians burnt houses and killed Muslims in 3 villages for 3 days, and then Boko Haram retaliated by killing all the males in Atagara. Well, we had 6 students in Atagara at that time from our Bible school, so we knew what was happening there and their families. It was terrible. And all these newsletters went out around the world by missionaries, mainly Western people who found out about it. Not one of them mentioned the Muslims that had been killed by Christians before Boko Haram made their main strike. And so I find that disturbing. And oftentimes when you mention it, they get angry at you, like you're siding with Muslims or something, or like you're saying that Islam isn't dangerous. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm just saying that this is what happened. Um, but, Christians would come a few times to our site that we were on, where we rented in those days at Buckaroo, for our Bible college. Christians would come to burn down our main buildings because they were owned by a Muslim man.
yeah,
And, I can understand, in a sense, the anger of the youth because, they've had these conflicts over, from year to year, different times, and they just want to get rid of it entirely by getting all the Muslim properties out of their areas. And they, I understand their sentiments, but I do not condone it. This is wrong. And not only that, but it's not going to help in the end. Just going to create more animosity. Um, but So Christians came to our site another time. They kept doing this to burn down our buildings. We had to beg them not to burn down our buildings with all of our stuff in it,
yeah,
and that we're Christians, and it was really hard to change because they just so wanted destruction.
mm,
They were so bent on destruction that it was a real disappointment for them not to do this. And then they came to kill a Muslim barrister who's a friend of ours, very good friend of ours today. And one of our leaders hid him in his room so the Christians couldn't find him, and told the Christians he ran over there, see him going
mm,
in the night. Uh, so they chased a shadow over the hill
mm,
at night time. Well, he risked his own life to save the life of this Muslim. So that's loving your enemy. Now, Barrister's never been our enemy,
mm,
but Christians would call him that just because he's a Muslim. Um, so even if someone had hurt you, you can still love them. It's not the church's job to punish the wicked; it's the government's job,
yeah,
and we're to treat people as people. Because the truth is we were sinners. We had done wrong. We had done evil to people, yet God forgave us and saved us. So why shouldn't we extend that same grace to others? Do
mm,
we think we're better than others? That's the whole problem with hating your enemy. Um, what if what if God hated us because of the people we were enemies of? We've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So if we're going to judge other people for their sin, well, what about our sin? Why
mm,
doesn't God judge us?
mm,
Well, He will judge us if we judge others. So we need to extend. The Bible says in Romans 5 that while we were enemies, Christ died for us.
yeah,
So that's how we need to treat our enemies. The same way Christ did. And but at the same time, It's the government's job. So you get Romans chapter 12 that says, love your enemies, and Romans chapter 13 that says the government should punish the wicked and defend the weak, the
Mm,
vulnerable.
mm, mm,
Any government that does not do that is not a government. They're a criminal organization.
mm.
Um, so government's job is to punish the wicked, um, and not to compromise with that. If you compromise with the wicked and allow them to continue, they'll just kill more people tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, so because the government has failed its primary job, which is to protect the vulnerable. Its primary job is not to protect the wicked, but protect the vulnerable. And
mm,
this has nothing to do with religion. A murderer is a murderer no matter what religion they are. It has nothing to do with ethnicity. A
yeah,
murderer is a murderer no matter what ethnicity they are. The
yeah,
government is to hold this job up impartially. And and so not to say, well, Muslims are killing Christians, so therefore all Muslims are bad and all Christians are good.
mm,
That's not the case. That government is not to do that. The government is to say, okay, here is the law, and every person in this country, no matter their faith or ethnicity, is to abide by the law.
yeah.
So yeah, that's the situation.
Mm.
Yeah,
Thank you, sir. I would want to just echo those last sentiments you shared there, that the duty of government, especially as we see in Romans 13, is to protect the weak and penalize the wicked. When the government begins to protect the wicked and expose the weak, a nation unravels, a nation crumbles, and we degrade into anarchy. Like we're beginning to see in our nation, Nigeria, today, a lot of people are losing faith in political structures, in government, in leadership, because a lot of us young people feel like, government has reversed the trend. They've not protected the weak. Rather, they've harbored criminals and made given protection to people who have looted us, people who have stolen from us, and people who are responsible for our backwardness, people who partner with international organizations and international criminals to keep raping and destroying this nation. Rather than protect us, we've been exposed, and there's a lot of distrust today. But all that can be remedied if the right thing is done. So I do hope that, I want to believe that from time to time, people who are in places of power and responsible for making sensitive decisions concerning this nation come across these discussions that we have also and listen to you talk, that they can also take a cue from these things and make amends. It's never too late to get it right. The duty of government is to uphold and protect the weak and punish the wicked. And if that begins to happen in Nigeria, in our communities, in our local governments, regardless of ethnicity, religion, political affiliation, our country is certain to become better for it. Prof, thank you very much. As ever,
thank
it's
you,
been very refreshing and a pleasure having this conversation with you today again. Thank you for taking the time to share. And we
thank you,
look
sir.
forward to the next time when
Pleasure.
we get to sit down to
Well
talk. I
done,
like
sir.
this. I Before we got started on this subject, I was a bit apprehensive. I didn't know how it was going to go. I knew that a lot of uncomfortable conversations would come up, questions that everybody would not be dancing about. But then you handled it all with grace. God bless you, sir. Thank you
Thank you,
very, very much. Yeah,
thank you.
I appreciate it. Have a great day.
Well done, sir. You handled it well
Yes.
too. Thank you very much. Pleasure.
Yes.
Bye bye, sir.